when you see power of a power, that means that we're taking a whole power, right? A power has two parts. It's got the base and it's got the exponent, right? But this whole thing is called a power. So when we're taking a power and we're raising it to an exponent, we're creating another power, right? So for example, this is a power, but this whole thing is now a power. So we're taking a power and raising it to an exponent. All right, so I'm going to rewrite this since I wrote all over it. We've got 3 to the second to the third. Now think about what that means. That means 3 times 3, 3 times, right? So that would be like 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. And when you add all of those 3's up, you get 3 to the 6th. I could have also gotten that, instead of writing all of these 3's out, I could have also gotten that by multiplying the exponents here, by multiplying these two numbers together. So we've learned now that when you see two numbers written together, like for example, if I wrote a 3 in parentheses and a 5 in parentheses, we learned that that means multiplication, right? So that would be 15. So for me, the way that I kind of trigger my brain to remember that I have to multiply here is because these numbers are right next to each other with only the parenthesis separating them, right? So I've got these two numbers that are right next to each other, and the only thing that's separating them are is the close of the parentheses. Okay, so let's look at this next one. Because for this next one, I've got to do two things actually. I'm going to simplify inside the parentheses first. And again, this was in the last video. If you're not sure how to multiply powers with the same base, check it out. So here, to multiply powers with the same base, we add the exponents, right? So this is going to become 2 to the 5th raised to the 4th power, right? And then I multiply. Remember, the only thing separating them is that little closed parenthesis symbol. So that means multiply. So I would get 2 to the 20th. And I'm glad I didn't have to write that one out in expanded form. All right, and let's take a look at this last one. When I divide powers with the same base, I have to subtract. So 2 minus 3 is the same thing as 2 plus a negative 3, right, which is -1. So this is going to become 2 to the -1 to the 4th. Now I'm going to do power of a power. So that means I have to multiply -1 times 4. See, those integers are really coming in handy now. -1 times 4 is -4. So I get 2 to the -4th power. We just learned what to do with these negative exponents, and the way that we simplify it further is to put 1 over 2 to the +4. And this, again, is not a very large power, so we can figure this one out without a calculator. 2 times 2, 4, times 2, 8, times 2, 16. So I get 1 over 16 as my final answer on that one. Now, this one, you're probably looking at it going, well, why didn't we figure out 2 to the 20th? Because it's huge. It's a really big number. So chances are, if you're given a problem like this, you're just going to leave it in exponent form. But if it's something like 2 to the 4th, 2 to the 5th, maybe even 2 to the 6th, that's small enough that you can figure out what that power is equal to.